Jumpin In on Manx Radio.
With Howard and Chris Kane.
Hello.
Good evening.
And welcome. And off we go again, another mad merry-go-round on a Saturday night. It is, of course, the best in modern and contemporary jazz from around the globe here on Jumpin' In with myself, H.
And me, Chris. Yes, welcome along to this week's show. The clocks are jumping forward and lighter mornings and evenings really make you feel summer is on the way, don't they? Even if the weather doesn't always feel ready to join in. So let's not forget, there's only 8 weeks to TT, can you believe? Let's hope that any ideas the steam picket has to sell off a boat are put on hold until after this year's festival. So, H, what's been getting you revved up this week and sounding hot? And what's keeping you chilled for now?
Ethan Iverson's got something which is technically acceptable. I see that's already been tipped by a few punters as being in the records of the year. Would you believe EST would have been 30 years old this year? Sadly, of course, has been no longer with us. However, his bandmates are, and they have a tribute album coming out with other players, which sounds fantastic on Act, and the drummer Dan Weiss has been at it as well.
And from me, we intrude, we elude, we extrude, and to begin with, we're elegant people, believe it or not, with the Doncaster Jazz Alumni. Yes, indeed. Elegant People, a Wayne Short piece originally featured on the Weather Report album Black Market. And if you don't know that, where have you been? You haven't been listening to Jumpin' In for quite long enough, perhaps. In this instance, given a fantastic big band arrangement by the Doncaster Jazz Alumni under Reuben Fowler, the trumpeter, with their recent release on Ubuntu, 50 Years. The brainchild of John Ellis, who started teaching brass back in 1973, John felt that to be relevant in the 20th century, teaching should include jazz and modern production to give youngsters the chance to, and give them the tools they needed to compete in this challenging industry. And with a seed fund of £12, can you imagine? He started the Doncaster Jazz Alumni, which over the next half century provided a gateway for many fine young players to a career in music, often via Nijo. The band flourished, toured around the globe, and after an impromptu gig at Dante's Jazz Club in Hollywood, respected jazz critic Leonard Feather wrote in the LA Times, jazz education being almost non-existent in much of England and Doncaster being a small mining town in South Yorkshire, it was doubly astonishing to hear that these young musicians give a really swinging account of themselves, that these Britons have overcome educational obstacles well enough to place them at least on the level of the best US college bands was made very clear. With too many names on the list to mention, this recording is a big thank you to John for his dedication in encouraging young people into jazz over many years, and many of the original members make the cut on the session. The Doncaster Jazz Alumni, 50 Years on Ubuntu Records, is out now.
And very nice it is too. Now, Ethan Iverson is a well-known name in modern jazz circles, famously, of course, led from the piano. Perhaps not leading, they may dispute that, but the Bad Plus, I think they put themselves down as a cooperative. Anyway, produced wonderful sound, cutting-edge stuff for many years before Ethan decided to branch out and head off on his own. Bad Plus are still going and have reformed now as a quartet, of course, famously. We saw them a couple of years ago at London Jazz Festival. Ethan, meanwhile...
No piano, though.
And, pardon me?
And no, they have no piano.
I know, well, it's they obviously did have I think they had Orrin Evans on piano for a while, didn't they? And then he sort of left to do his own thing. So interesting. Ethan now he's very quirky. He has a very popular website, I think, called Do the Math, and is a great commentator on politics, music, all sort of intellectual matters, a big thinker, I guess, and very quirky, very dry sense of humour. I've met him once or twice, although we've never managed to interview him, sadly. All of which is lead up to his latest album, Technically Acceptable, out on Blue Note, as is quite often the case, just features his face on the front cover, looking pretty stern. Although he seems a nice enough chap, like I said, wonderfully dry, quirky sense of humour, as indeed is most of his music. Quirky, dry, definite sense of humour. He's a sort of almost a sort of modern-day Thelonious Monk, you could say. Or at least I could say in any case. So this one, Technically Acceptable. And of that, he says in the liner notes, not a great deal, other than the fact that he says the programme opens with a substantial set from the ensemble that will be playing at the Village Vanguard and touring Europe at the time of this record's release. Thomas Morgan and Kush Abedi are major stylists. My composition for a trio of this calibre are usually fairly basic and easy to grasp, enabling good-humoured interplay from the first beat. And of the track, Technically Acceptable, which of course is the title track for the album, he says, it is required to announce from the stage the next piece is technically acceptable. Typical, as he says, nice simple melody, a real foot tapper, just loping along there. Wonderful support from Kushabedi at drums. Thomas Morgan, brilliant understated jazz player as well, just doing that lovely walking bass line. And again, if you listen to the whole album, I haven't had a chance to give it a really good go through yet, but again, several different styles, very quirky. There's a version towards the end of the album, I think the penultimate track of Round Midnight, with the theme played on the theremin by Rob Schwimmer. The theremin, if you don't know it, it was an early electronical instrument. We don't actually touch anything. There's just two aerials and you wave your hands around. One controls the pitch of the note and the other gives you modulation and whatever. Very, very difficult to play. It looks actually quite easy, but it's difficult to play well. And, you know, it sounds quirky, it sounds weird, it sounds typically Ethan Iverson. Lots of interesting things to enjoy, and I'm looking forward to listening more to that album over the Easter weekend with a little bit of, look, as I say, typically quirky, a bit of Ellingtonia going on there with some of those chordings, I thought. And I think he is a bit of an Ellington fan, but as I say, for my money, he's almost a 21st century Thelonious Monk. You never quite know what you're going to get next from him. Interestingly, the first one on Blue Note, he did Every Note is Truth, I think, in 2021. All-star lineup, Larry Grenadier on bass, Jack DeJohnette at the drums. Didn't really work. It was a bit disappointing. I thought we were a bit disappointed and great fans of all of them. And interestingly, I wasn't alone in that the general review was, yeah, it's a bit lacklustre this, which just goes to prove, you know, the sum can be much greater than the sum of the parts, or whatever you want to say. Or, in other words, put an all-star group together does not necessarily mean you're going to get an all-star album. And I think Downbeat found out that years ago when they always used to bring all the Downbeat poll winners together for an album, and 9 times out of 10 it was a bit rubbish. That one isn't. Could be on the list. Very good indeed.
Not always the case, of course, but nonetheless, you're absolutely right in that case. And the theremin, if you're still uncertain about it, just go and watch any 1950s or 1960s science fiction film. You'll be right up there with theremin happening in the background. This Island Earth, any of those. Now, next up for me, a release from the Norwegian trio Maridalen, who we have featured before. The band's name came from the scenic valley just north of Oslo, and their first two releases were recorded in a small wooden chapel there. Slightly unusual lineup, sax, trumpet and bass. For this third album, they've relocated to a small island in the Oslo fjord, this time adding a couple of guests, which really adds up a new dimension to their sparse Nordic sound. Here's Indront. beautiful and evocative sound of Maridal and the Norwegian trio of Anders Hefre on sax, Jonas Kilmok-Veni on trumpet and Andreas Rödland Hager on double bass. This time the trio has been enhanced by adding Emil Brechtsted on pedal steel guitar and Erland Dahlen on percussion, as well as quite a lot of atmospheric wildlife and water ambience recorded on the small island of Gressholmen. The album, perhaps not surprisingly knowing their past history, is simply called Grasshopper. It was released yesterday, and many thanks to Jim at Ampersand PR for sending us a copy.
You are listening to Jumpin' In with Chris and myself, H, and this is Dan Weiss. Good ending. That is from Dan Weiss. Odds Even, that is called his latest release, or even odds, if I get the right way around. Even odds, odds even, depending which way you look at it, I suppose. Typically, again, sort of spiky stuff from Dan Weiss, the drummer. Loves challenging sort of different signatures, changing sort of styles all the time. And with that trio, as you gathered there, Miguel Zenon on the sax, who's produced some great albums in the last few years, and we featured him quite a bit on Jumpin' In, and Matt Mitchell at the piano, both long-time collaborators over the years with Dan Weiss. And like I said, he loves playing games. He says he loves sort of playing games musically and mentally and all the rest of it. and he says he had sort of two different ideas of the way they did their compositions. So one of them, so in the album, he says he's got two distinct approaches to this balance of composition and improvisation. 6 of the pieces, he says, are traditional compositions. So he provides written material, they then play, improvise together, and then sort of come out with a head again at the end. The other pieces on the album, he says the remaining pieces were crafted as game-like provocations. Gauntlets, if you will, thrown down to my bandmates. They began life as brief drum exercises or grooves that he recorded solo, then presented them to Zenon and Mitchell and asked them to improvise their music over them to make little sort of miniatures in a different way. Again, the result is fascinating. Lots of short, little spiky, short, intense pieces, quite drum heavy, as you might well imagine from a drummer-composer, but none the worse for that. Even Odds is well worth checking out. It is was actually out on the 29th, so pretty much out as we speak, or just a week or so ago in any case. Cygnus Recordings, you'll find it in your local whatever. I was going to say record shop. Go to your record shop because it's record store day around about this time of the year, isn't it? But of course, I know some people will go for your download and other options, but check it out one way or another.
And we are sadly running very short of record shops these days.
Yeah, we are these days, aren't we?
Yeah. Now, a new name for me on the scene for saxophonist Michael Thomas. In his 30s, Michael has had 3 previous releases, but The Illusion of Choice is his debut on Criss Cross Records, who have consistently high quality output and have not had a bad record from Criss Cross, I don't think. When I saw the rhythm section included Manuel Valera, who had Vessels last year was one of my favourite releases. I couldn't wait to hear this, and, well, I wasn't disappointed. Here's the title track, The Illusion of Choice. The Illusion of Choice, the title track of a fine new release from saxophonist Michael Thomas and his quartet. Referencing pianist Manuel Valera, bassist Matt Brewer and drummer Obed Calvar, Michael said, "This was a dream band to write and play with. These musicians can play any style and sound like it's the only thing they play. I wanted to explore these different areas and not sound just like a load of tunes stuck together for a CD. I wasn't afraid to develop whatever ideas I came up with and see where they went." And where they went was The Illusion of Choice, released last week on Crisscross, and many thanks to them for sending through a copy.
Terrific stuff. Really enjoyed that. And yes, Calvin Aubert, wonderful drummer, very subtle,
Valera's
very
great
tasteful.
pianist too, isn't he?
Yeah,
Very
really good stuff. Really good stuff. Now then, there can't be many listeners to Jumpin In, or indeed lovers on modern jazz, who haven't heard of EST, the Esbjørn Svensson trio, who dominated the scene for so many years, I think in the late 90s and early 20s. They got together in 1993, Esbjørn Svensson, Dan Berglund on bass, Magnus Öström at the drums. Esbjørn and Magnus had played together since they were kids, playing sort of piano and drum stuff, and then they got together later on with Dan Berglund and started playing this music, and I think they just started playing it. They didn't even think it was jazz particularly. They just wanted to get together and play. They loved their sort of various fusion type sound they had. So between them, they loved rock and pop and classical and folk and improvisation and sort of jazz. And as is often the case when you blend all these things together, it gets lumped into the jazz category, whether you like it or not. Over the next 15 years or so, they became massive hits, played all over the world, big concerts, big light shows quite often, 10 studio albums, several live recordings, gold discs, win awards left, right and centre, etc. And then sadly it all ground to or at least it came to a very sudden halt when Esbjørn was killed tragically in a diving accident. It took a long time for the other two to find their feet, but they have done and carried on, and as they say, the love continues. And to mark the 30th anniversary of the beginning of EST, Magnus and Dan have got together with some other luminaries of the Nordic jazz scene and the modern jazz scene, Magnus Lindgren, Joel Lissaradis, the wonderful Veneri Payola, and the guitarist Ulf Vakinius, to reinterpret some of the music of EST. Let's hear 7 Days of Falling.
Hey folks, this is Ant Law here, Ant Law Guitar. You're listening to Jumpin' In, Chris and H on Manx Radio.
there we go. A twofer, as we say. Well, certainly as I say on Sweden Swing. And if you remember twofers, if you're of an age in the old days of vinyl, I say the old days, it's still going strong, isn't it? And like I said, Record Store Day coming up, I think, is it 18th of April, somewhere around there, 20th of April? Lots of vinyl on sale then. Forfers, I saw in some cases. That was a quick taste of the crib from the wonderful New Zealand drummer Mark Lockhart, his album Swings and Roundabouts. And before that, like I say, the wonderful sound of the music of EST's 7 Days of Falling. And this was, as you might have gathered at the beginning there, it was actually recorded live. So like I said, Magnus Öström and Dan Berglund got together with Joe Lissarides, Magnus Lindgren, Veneri Piola and Ulf Vikinius to give two major concerts, one at the Kölner Philharmonie and the other at the Philadelphia Church in Stockholm. And these were recorded and they played essential pieces from the EST repertoire. And Magnus said, you know, it's just wonderful. He said there was a feeling of sadness and gratitude and happiness all at the same time. It felt unreal, surreal, but very natural. He says he can't stop marvelling how great the music was and how great Esbjörn's compositions and arrangements we did as a trio back in the day. They feel timeless. And he said what really convinced me more than anything was, he says, this is music that should be played, not lying around in a drawer. Amen to that. Still sounded really terrific stuff, and a great sound. It sounded, yes, remarkably natural, and there are great tunes without a doubt. It is a 2 CD compilation coming out, also on LP and digital, of course. However, you're going to have to wait a wee while. The release date isn't until May the 31st. And that's on ACT, by the way.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. And you know, if you don't know them, you dive back in at the beginning and work your way through. Lots and lots of great tunes and thoroughly nice fellas, all three of them. Well, that's about it for this week's show, but we've just got time to fit in a track from the new release from pianist Simon Lasky for The Dreamers as his first release for 5 years and his debut on Ubuntu. Simon, who hails from London, moved to Tampa, Florida to study for a master's in jazz studies under the tutelage of big band legend Chuck Owen, and since then he's become a bit of a regular on the stateside jazz scene. Now he has both an American and British bands, and this octet brings together the best of both, with a US sextet and sax soloists from the UK, Paul Booth and the wonderful Tim Garland. Now, the official launch party will be at the 606 Club in Chelsea, one of our favourite haunts, on the 10th of July. So if you're down there, make a booking for that, one for the diary. Here's The Outsiders. See you next week. Jumping in.
Be good.